During World War II, Adolf Hitler frequently traveled by air. In 1942 and 1943, as battles raged on the Eastern Front, Hitler relied on a specially outfitted squadron of aircraft to move safely across his empire. These planes weren't just for transportation, they were his flying fortress, designed to keep him protected and comfortable. Hitler's primary aircraft was a Focke-Wulf 200 Condor. Originally built as a civilian airliner and long-range patrol aircraft, Hitler's version was heavily modified. It was armored against anti-aircraft fire and enemy fighters, and the interior was luxurious. The cabins were lined with polished wood, plush carpets, and high-end seating. Even the smallest details were carefully planned. He had a custom armchair equipped with a parachute, allowing him to escape through a special hatch in case of emergency. 2 additional Condors always accompanied Hitler's personal plane. One carried his staff and guests in a 14-seat cabin, while the other was used for transporting baggage and his security team. When these planes flew, they were always escorted by German fighter aircraft to ensure their safety. The man entrusted with Hitler's life in the air was SS Gruppenführer Hans Bauer, a former Lufthansa captain. Despite their precautions, flying during this time was extremely dangerous. Allied air activity was increasing, and the risk of being shot down was ever present. In 1942, Hitler undertook several perilous flights. One of the most notable was his trip to Finland to meet with Marshal Mannerheim, who was his ally. On other occasions, he flew to visit the headquarters of Army Group South on the Eastern Front. During one such mission, disaster nearly struck. As Bauer piloted Hitler's Condor back from a meeting, Soviet fighters ambushed the plane just after takeoff. The Condor's wings were riddled with machine gun fire. Bauer, however, kept his cool. He managed to outmaneuver the attackers by flying directly toward them, a daring move that forced the Soviet planes to break off. Miraculously, the Condor escaped without major damage. One of the most dangerous episodes occurred on February 17, 1943, when Hitler traveled to Zaporozhe, Ukraine, to meet with Field Marshal von Manstein, the commander of Army Group South. At the time, the German front was collapsing after the devastating defeat at Stalingrad. Soviet forces were advancing rapidly, and Zaporozhe was only 36 miles from the Red Army's positions. Hitler's convoy of 3 Condors landed at dawn. As Hitler attended meetings, Bauer and the aircrew stayed at the airfield, constantly monitoring the planes. Tension was high, and for good reason. On February 19th, news arrived that Soviet tanks were closing in on the airfield. Messerschmitt 109 fighters were scrambled to attack the advancing tanks, but bad weather made it impossible to locate the enemy. Reports from scout planes confirmed the worst. 22 Soviet T-34 tanks were less than 2 hours away. With no defenses at the airfield, panic set in. Bauer rushed to warn Hitler in person, suggesting they move the planes to a safer location. Hitler refused. He insisted on completing his meetings, even as the Soviet threat loomed closer. By the time Hitler returned to the airfield, the situation was critical. The engines of the Condors were already running. As Hitler and his entourage boarded, the planes taxied onto the runway and took off just in time. Moments later, German transport planes arrived carrying reinforcements and anti-tank weapons to defend the airfield. The Soviet tanks, low on fuel, did not attack. If the Red Army had known Hitler was there, they likely would have pressed the attack, regardless of losses. It was an incredibly close call, and Hitler himself remarked, "A bit of luck for us." Just a month later, in March 1943, Hitler's luck was tested again. While flying back to his headquarters, the Wolf's Lair, from Smolensk, an assassination attempt nearly succeeded. A group of German officers opposed to Hitler managed to smuggle a bomb disguised as a package onto his Condor. The bomb's timer was set to detonate mid-flight, but freezing temperatures in the unheated cargo hold prevented the fuse from working. The plane landed safely, and the failed bomb was recovered by the conspirators. Hitler remained completely unaware of how close he had come to death. Throughout the war, Hitler's travels were marked by near misses and narrow escapes. Whether it was Soviet fighters, advancing tanks, or sabotage attempts, he seemed to have an uncanny ability to avoid disaster. But luck only lasts so long. By the end of the war, in April 1945, the Red Army was just 500 meters from Hitler's Berlin bunker when he ended his life. These incredible stories of Hitler's travels highlight the constant dangers he faced during the war. Whether from his enemies or even his own people, threats were everywhere. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's most dangerous figures, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel.